Okay, hello. This video is an attempt to put together into some kind of coherent package all of the elements we studied in this reading on impediments to responsible action. So I'm going to go through some topics and I'm going to try and explain how I think they fit together. And the first one is rationalization, and it's a good place to start because you've probably seen it. Have you ever had a friend or someone you know, they're about to do something and it's dumb. It's not the right thing to do. And you ask them why they're going to do it, and they give you some weird story or chain of it that just really doesn't make any sense. And like, what? Why are you thinking like that? Well, the reason they're thinking like that is because they really want to do this thing. And so they choose to believe a set of things that make that thing look good. Right? Rationalization is when we take something we want to do or something we want to believe, and we find a way of making it look like it's sensible, at least to us. So rationalization is actually kind of a form of something called self-deception. Self-deception is when we fool ourselves. This is intentional. It's a matter of choices. When we fool ourselves into believing things that are not really supported by logic, not really supported by evidence. And the way we do this is by avoiding thoughts that make us uncomfortable and going where we feel good. We feel smart, we feel brave, we feel like we're the ones that are really understanding things. And that means we can, and this is, by the way, a truly infinite capacity. There's no bottom to this. Human beings can fool themselves in all kinds of ways. People generally tend to believe what they believe so they can feel good about the things they do or don't do. Okay, so that is the basic motor here. We believe things. We have a tendency to believe things that make it possible to do things that are maybe not sensible, maybe not honorable, but to feel to ourselves that we're not doing anything wrong. We're making the right decisions. We're honorable, honest people when we're not. Right? So here's some sort of technical things that are the kind of part of self-deception, kind of part of rationalization. Rationalization has a terrible name. It should not be called rationalization. Rationalization should mean something like being rational or making something actually rational. And it's kind of the opposite. It's making something look rational when it probably isn't. Right? Normalizing deviance. Actually a fairly simple thing. Normalizing deviance is you have something that's not working up to spec, and instead of fixing the device, you change the specification, so now you're meeting the specification. You're not meeting the original specification, you're meeting a new one that you made up. It's sort of changing the rules while the game is still going on. And, like cheating at solitaire. Oh, look, I've won because I changed the rules, so this is what wins. Operational versus developmental vehicles. This actually is right. You're rushing something into production. Well, not you. You wouldn't do that. But somebody's rushing something into production. Says, those teething problems don't really count. This is actually, it's good to go. Yeah, imagine you're going to be sent up in a spaceship, and one of the engineers, let's say, oh, by the way, we haven't finished developing this yet. The management just sort of decided, hey, this is the closest one to ready to go, so we're going to redefine it as operational. Right? It's not something that's still in development. It's something that's finished. It's ready to go. You're safe. Trust me. Trust us. Technically, burden of proof. Look at criminal justice related TV shows, right? prosecution always has the burden of proof in a criminal trial. They have to prove that he did it, that the defendant did it. The defense does not have to prove that. They just have to prove that the prosecution didn't prove that they did it. Or the jury decides the prosecution hasn't made its case, not guilty. This figures in a story about the space shuttle Columbia, I think the Columbia disaster, where there was a bit of foam, fell off and hit the space shuttle on the wing route. And engineers go to the management and say, you know, we think we might have damaged it. It might have damaged it. We want to authorize an EVA, so that some astronaut will go out and look at that and see if there's any damage. They'll inspect it. And the manager says, well, can you prove that it's damaged? Can you prove this? And they said, well, no, we think it might be, but we can't prove it. That's why we want the EVA. We want to go, no. If you cannot prove to me that it actually is damaged, we don't know that, I'm not authorizing the EVA. That's expensive. We're not going to do that. So that's, ignorance. Ignorance is a funny word. Ignore ants. It's somebody who's ignoring something. So an ignorant person. And there's a usage of that. When you say somebody's ignorant, you're not saying simply that there's some things that they don't know. You're kind of saying that they're ignoring something. Ignorance is sometimes willful. It's chosen. People tend not to think about things that make them uncomfortable. And so when you have someone before you who seems absolutely unaware of some important social condition, of something that's going on in the world, or an important piece of technical data, well, they could have been asleep for the last 40 years, but maybe also they've avoided thinking. And when you get to know them and you realize that their information is not sticking, they're not paying it. I've run into people where you could tell them the truth right to their face, and they'd act like you weren't speaking, and then they'd go away and they'd go on with the ignorance. And that, right? So it's willful and therefore morally culpable. Sometimes people make mistakes because of stuff they don't know. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge, that bridge where it wobbles back and forth and the wind keeps blowing and it wobbles more and more. The engineers didn't know that the bridge would store energy. They thought it would dissipate it just as it gets in, and the bridge would sway back and forth. It's a suspension bridge, sway back and forth, and when the wind died down, everything's fine. No, the wind keeps blowing, the bridge breaks. Swing, swing, swing. They didn't know. Other things, though, where the information is out there and it's easily available, and somebody does the wrong thing because they didn't know, but the information's there, it's where they would know to look for it. They haven't actually looked up for it. Yeah, that's culpable, that's negligence. It's not just not knowing stuff, it's not being informed, it's they made sure they didn't know. So, talking of culpability, we have the Milgram experiments, and I want to sum that up to you, is that what the Milgram experiments seem to show is that if you're an authority figure and you have trappings of authority and you're closer to me, I'm more likely to do bad things simply because you tell me. People, thankfully not everybody, but many people have this tendency to just follow authority. There is an authority, someone who's giving orders with confidence and expects to be obeyed. I'm like, oh yes, I want that. And you notice this in politics. There's a lot of people who want someone to just tell them what to do and tell them what to think. and they will follow them, and they will engage in all kinds of practices of self-deception to make this leader the great leader who's always right, and they get very angry when they're questioned. So, and then there are people who resist this and fight against it. But right, the trappings of authority, even scientific authority, the white lab coat, glasses, and a clipboard can make people do. This was related to the Holocaust. How could Germans have been so cruel? How could they have just gone along with this mass murder? And part of it was they were told to do it by people that they found to be in authority. Leads us on to this big thing called groupthink, which is where sort of like all this comes together. Groupthink is when you have a group of people who have a more mutually reinforcing disconnection from reality. That they start to believe stuff that isn't supported by evidence, but they tell each other that it's true, and they all nod along and agree, and the group can make horrible decisions and be very destructive to the company and to other things. Most extreme example of groupthink that I know was the Johnson administration during the Vietnam War, where all the information coming in said, this is not working. The war is failing. Americans and Vietnamese are dying for no reason. You should do something differently. And they didn't. There's scenes where, Lyndon Baines Johnson would say something really stupid that was against all the intelligence they were getting, like the morale of the Viet Cong is steadily declining and eventually they'll have no more will to fight within weeks, months at the most. And everyone would go, oh yeah. And the intelligence people were telling them, nope, their morale is just up and up and up. They have the strongest will to fight we've ever seen. Curious thing about that was a fellow called Walt Rostro was a member of Johnson's cabinet, and before every meeting he told himself, today's the day that I stand up to LBJ. And then he didn't, never did. Right. And there's certain things that go along with this, and this is a process. This is something that's about an interaction between people. It's not inevitable, it can be overcome, but it is a matter of forces and pressures on people. One of those pressures is a feeling of being in the group, like, oh yeah, I'm in the group, I'm part of the team, I'm on the bus. Again, people in group sittings tend to use rationalization, and they tend to use self-censorship. Have you ever been in a group where they're all saying something and they're really confident and agreeing, and you're sitting there going, no, the science says something completely different. This is wrong. And then you don't say anything. And sometimes that's very sensible. There might be a bunch of idiots that would get abusive if you contradict them. That's like, there might be family, or it might be your boss and his friends, or something where you would get if you spoke up. But there's this tendency in groupthink, sometimes people don't speak up when they should. They censor themselves when they should be criticizing. And in groupthink, that is one of the forces. Groupthink also has rewards. There's an illusion of you're in the vulnerable group. You're the winners. You're the winning group. This is the group that's going to win. And you're morally right. This is the ethical group. We are morally superior to everybody else, or at least morally equal. Nobody's more moral than we are. And unanimity. And the unanimity is a weird thing, because I'm sitting in the group and, well, have you ever been in class and there's something you don't understand, but you look around and everybody else seems to be getting it? So you just, I'll ask someone afterwards. And you ask someone after class, and I have no idea. Nobody knew what it was, but everybody was like, oh yes, I understand. I know what he's talking about. Oh yeah, make some notes. There, you see, I've got it. And then afterwards, and yeah, everyone thinks, well, I should have asked a question. So in a group, as you look around and they're like all nodding along, I'm like, well, it looks like everybody else agrees, so I might as well agree. I should agree. They must be right. There's more of them than me, so they must be right. And so you self-censor, and we create this illusion that everybody in the group agrees. And it could be that nobody agrees with that. It's just someone threw it out thinking that's what the group thinks, and nobody actually thinks it. But nobody's got the nerve to say, no, that's no good. Right. So groupthink is a real impediment to responsible action, because the group flows on its emotions. It's driven by its feelings, things that would be, there have been some spectacularly bad decisions made in history. If you look at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms decision to storm the Waco compound, which ended up basically murdering most of the people in the compound. The FBI was involved too. They were pretty equally stupid, because they didn't step back and say, maybe this isn't a good idea. Nobody with any influence was able to get them to change their minds or really make a stink about it. So that's the kind of thing that can go wrong with groupthink. And the only real antidote is the people involved choosing not to go along with it. It requires at least one person to kick it off and say, nope, that is not a good idea. Here is why. No, there's no evidence for what you're saying, but there is evidence for the opposite. Here is the evidence. By the way, one of the things that maintains groupthink is something called mind guarding. If I'm like the group facilitator or leader, and I like the consensus, and I know there's an outside expert who disagrees, I'm going to make sure that the people in the group never hear from that expert. Right? And other people from other groups, no, we're not going to consult the other group. We're not going to make a presentation to executives. We're just going to figure out what we think and act on it. We're not going to get outside information. Right? And again, there's that disconnection from reality. Getting outside opinions is one of the things that can reconnect a group to reality. So the bottom line is you've got to be willing to dissent, willing to bring in outside information, willing to change your mind and to try to change other people's minds, and willing to listen to dissenters, to other people who say, yeah, I'm not so sure about this. Let's think about this evidence, think about this logic and this argument. Okay, so really, the most important factor in ensuring that engineers act responsibly is your willingness, the willingness of individual engineers to think for themselves, independently of what anybody else thinks or feels or wants to make them feel. And then to act on that, to disagree, to up and disagree, and to support other people when they disagree, and to try to make sure ideas are thrashed out logically and rationally. Okay, that's it. That's the video. There's some study questions, a practice quiz. Please take the practice quiz before you take the 4-credit quiz, because the practice quiz, you have multiple tries, and the 4-credit quiz, you do once. You have one go at that. All right, that's why I have a practice quiz, so you can prepare for that. All right. Thank you for listening.